Do something before your people, before the world. Show yourself.
There are moments in history where a single piece of paper changes everything. Not a declaration of war, not a signed treaty, just a lab report, 9 pages, double-spaced, printed on standard office stock with a header that read, Genomic Diagnostics International, case file GDM-2024-1887. It landed on a desk in Memphis, Tennessee on November 14, 2024, and the person who opened it sat in silence for 11 minutes before picking up the phone. That call set off a legal scramble so aggressive, so immediate, that it involved 4 law firms across 3 states before the sun went down. The report wasn't leaked to the press. It wasn't submitted to a court. It was sent directly to the executors of the Presley estate under seal, but with a notification that copies had been logged into a federal genetic database per standard protocol, which meant it couldn't be disappeared, it couldn't be bought, and it couldn't be explained away. What that report contained was a DNA analysis extracted from biological material recovered during a routine archival preservation project at Graceland in late 2023. The sample had been sitting in climate-controlled storage for over a year, labeled as part of a historical textile collection. Nothing that would raise alarms. But when an independent genealogist contracted by a documentary production company requested access to cross-reference some personal items for authentication purposes, the sample ended up in a lab that had no idea what they were about to walk into. The match came back at 99.97%, not to a distant cousin, but not to a descendant, to a living individual whose DNA was already on file in a commercial ancestry database. A man who had submitted his genetic profile in 2019, ostensibly to explore his heritage, though many now believe that submission was deliberate. His name is Bob Joyce. He's a pastor. He lives in Arkansas. He's been singing gospel music on YouTube for over a decade. And according to the forensic lab that processed the Graceland sample, his genetic markers are biologically consistent with Elvis Presley. Not similar, not explainable by familial relation, consistent with the same individual. Now, if you've spent any time on the internet in the last 15 years, you've probably seen the Bob Joyce theory treated like a punchline. Clips of him singing, side-by-side photos, comment sections full of people calling it ridiculous. And for a long time, that noise worked exactly as it was supposed to. It kept serious people from asking serious questions. But here's what changed. This wasn't a YouTube video. This wasn't a conspiracy blogger with a hunch. This was a lab with accreditation from the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, processed by a team that had no financial stake in the outcome, submitted into a federal system that doesn't care about fame or legacy or how much money is riding on a name. They ran the test the same way they'd run it for a murder trial, and the science came back clear. What makes this even more significant is the legal context that allowed it to happen at all. For decades, the Presley estate operated with a level of control over biological material, archival records, and even photographic evidence that most private families could never dream of. But in 2022, Tennessee updated its genetic privacy and database laws in ways that created narrow windows for third-party access under specific research conditions. That documentary production company that requested the textile analysis had no idea they were holding a genetic sample. The genealogist didn't know what she was sending to the lab. But once that sample entered the system and once the match was flagged, the protocol was automatic. Notify all parties with legal interest, log the findings, and that's where the control ended. Bob Joyce was notified on November 16th, 2 days after the estate received the report. His response, according to sources close to the situation, was not shock. It was not confusion, as it was a carefully worded statement delivered through an attorney that neither confirmed nor denied the findings, but requested privacy and expressed no interest in further testing. That kind of response doesn't come from someone blindsided. It comes from someone who's been preparing for this moment for a very long time. And the estate's reaction only made it more clear that this wasn't just unexpected. It was catastrophic. Within 72 hours, 3 separate legal motions were filed. One attempted to challenge the chain of custody on the Graceland sample. Another sought to have Bob Joyce's ancestry profile removed from the commercial database retroactively. The third, and this is the one that should disturb you, requested an emergency injunction to prevent any lab employee involved in the testing from discussing the case publicly, even in professional contexts. That's not the behavior of an institution confident in the historical record. That's the behavior of an institution that knows the story it's been selling for 47 years just became legally indefensible. But here's the thing about DNA evidence in the age of digital databases. You can file all the motions you want. You can threaten, you can settle, you can tie people up in NDAs until they can't breathe without a lawyer in the room. But you can't unring a bell that's already been heard by a federal system designed specifically to prevent tampering. The match is logged, the case number is real, and the people who saw that report before the lawyers got involved, they know exactly what it means. The DNA match wasn't the most disturbing part of what that lab report contained. It was the other biological marker, the one buried in the extended analysis on page 7. The telomere length data, the methylation patterns, the kind of aging markers that don't lie about when someone was born. And those markers were consistent with someone born in 1935. Not 1945, not 1950, 1935. The same year Elvis Aaron Presley came into this world. Which means Bob Joyce isn't just genetically identical to Elvis. He's genetically the right age to be Elvis. And if that's true, then everything you've been told about what happened on August 16, 1977 was a lie. For 20 years, Bob Joyce was treated like background noise. Just another Elvis impersonator with a church and a YouTube channel. He's just another guy who happened to sound like the king and looked vaguely similar if you squinted hard enough. The estate ignored him. The media dismissed him. And the people who suggested there might be something more to the story were laughed out of the room. But here's what none of those people could explain. Bob Joyce doesn't perform like an impersonator. He doesn't dress like Elvis. He doesn't move like him on stage. He's a pastor in simple clothes singing gospel music in small churches. And yet when he opens his mouth, something happens that no amount of practice or talent should be able to replicate. In 2017, a forensic audio analyst named Dr. Patricia Kovacs ran a study that never made headlines but circulated quietly among people who actually understand voice biometrics. She compared isolated vocal samples from Bob Joyce's sermons to archival recordings of Elvis Presley from the 1970s, specifically the later years when his voice had matured and deepened. She wasn't looking at style or song choice. She was analyzing pitch variance, resonance patterns, vocal cord vibration signatures, the kind of data that's as unique to an individual as a fingerprint. Her findings were published in a limited circulation forensic journal, and what she concluded was that the probability of two different individuals producing that level of phonetic alignment without shared anatomical structures was statistically negligible. In other words, she couldn't prove it was the same person, but she couldn't prove it wasn't. And for someone with her credentials to even leave that door open was stunning. And then there's the physical evidence that people love to ignore because it's uncomfortable. Bob Joyce has a scar on his upper lip. It's faint, but it's there. Elvis Presley had a documented scar in the exact same location from a childhood injury. Bob Joyce has a specific pattern of sun damage on his left hand that matches photographs of Elvis taken during his later years when he spent significant time outdoors at Graceland. And then there are the surgical marks. Bob Joyce has visible evidence of cosmetic or reconstructive work along his jawline and around his eyes. The kind of procedures that would be consistent with someone trying to alter their appearance just enough to live in public without being immediately recognized, but not so much that they looked like someone else entirely. But what really makes Bob Joyce different from every other person who's ever been caught up in an Elvis sighting story is what he doesn't have. He doesn't have a documented past before the year 2000. There's no birth certificate on file in any state database under the name Robert Joyce matching his age and description. There's no social security number issued prior to 1998. There are no school records, no military service, no employment history, nothing that would typically build the paper trail of a man who would now be in his late 60s. It's as if Bob Joyce simply appeared fully formed at the age of 60-something and started preaching. And when journalists or curious investigators have tried to track down where he came from, they hit walls that don't make sense unless someone very deliberately erased the path behind him. The estate's strategy for years was to let him exist in the margins. Let him be written off as a quirky footnote. Let him sing to small crowds and post videos that the algorithm would bury under a million other Elvis tribute acts. But in 2003, something happened that didn't become public until years later. A member of the Presley family, someone with direct blood ties and legal standing, reportedly attended one of Bob Joyce's services unannounced. They sat in the back. They listened. And after the service, they requested a private meeting. What was said in that room has never been fully disclosed, but 3 people who were present in the building that day have said privately that the family member walked out looking like they'd seen a ghost. Within a week, Bob Joyce received a visit from attorneys, not criminal attorneys, i.e. state attorneys. And after that meeting, Bob Joyce stopped doing interviews. He stopped answering questions about his past. And he never once, not in 2 decades, directly denied being Elvis Presley. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. That silence is a choice, and it's a legally significant one. Because if Bob Joyce came out tomorrow and said, "I am not Elvis, I never was, this is insane," he would be protected. He could live his life without the circus, but he hasn't done that. He's danced around it. He's deflected. Or he's smiled and said things like, "I'm just a man who loves the Lord," which is not a denial. It's a dodge. And the reason that matters is because a direct public denial could open him up to legal consequences if it were later proven false. Silence, on the other hand, is safe. It keeps the door open, and it keeps the people who know the truth from having to choose between loyalty and honesty. Then there's the 2019 DNA submission. Bob Joyce voluntarily put his genetic information into a commercial ancestry database, the kind millions of people use to find distant cousins and trace their heritage. But Bob Joyce didn't need to find his roots. He didn't follow up on matches. He didn't engage with the platform beyond the initial upload. It's as if he wanted his DNA in the system, wanted it searchable, or wanted it available for the day when someone would finally run the test that mattered. And when that Graceland sample hit the database 6 years later, his profile was sitting there waiting like a loaded gun. For 20 years, the estate's strategy was simple: ignore Bob Joyce. Let him fade into the background noise of Elvis impersonators and conspiracy blogs. Then in 2019, someone made a mistake. Someone with access to the original 1977 biological samples did something they weren't supposed to do. And that mistake is the only reason we're here today. The DNA sample that changed everything wasn't supposed to exist. Not in any accessible form. Not in any database where it could be cross-referenced without the estate's explicit permission. For 47 years, every biological trace of Elvis Presley had been guarded with the same ferocity that corporations protect trade secrets. Hair samples collected after his death were locked in vaults. Medical records were sealed under agreements so tight that even family members couldn't access them without legal intervention. The estate understood something that most people don't think about. In the age of genetic technology, DNA isn't just biological material. It's evidence. And evidence can destroy carefully constructed narratives faster than any journalist or investigator ever could. So when that textile preservation project at Graceland accidentally yielded viable genetic material in late 2023, it represented a failure of containment that decades of legal infrastructure had been specifically designed to prevent. The sample came from a piece of clothing, a scarf that had been stored in a climate-controlled archive since the early 1980s, cataloged as a historical artifact, but never subjected to the kind of forensic scrutiny that would reveal what it actually contained. Sweat, skin cells, the microscopic biological remnants that every human leaves behind on fabric they've worn close to their body. And because the preservation conditions had been carefully maintained for nearly 40 years, the DNA was remarkably intact, extractable, testable, and ultimately matchable. What the lab report revealed went far beyond a simple identity confirmation. The genetic profile extracted from that Graceland sample matched Bob Joyce's ancestry database submission at a level that forensic geneticists describe as indicative of same-source origin, not siblings, not parent and child, the same individual. The statistical probability of 2 unrelated people producing that level of genetic alignment across the markers tested is so infinitesimally small that it falls outside the threshold of reasonable doubt used in criminal proceedings. In plain language, the science says these samples came from the same person. And since one of those samples is definitively linked to Elvis Presley through documented chain of custody, the implications are unavoidable. But the match itself wasn't what made the estate's lawyers lose sleep. It was the supplementary analysis on page 7 of that 9-page report. Biological aging markers, telomere length, DNA methylation patterns. These are the forensic indicators that can estimate not just who someone is, but how old they are at the cellular level. And what those markers revealed about Bob Joyce's genetic profile is that his biological age is consistent with someone born in the mid-1930s, not the 1950s, not the 1960s, the mid-1930s, which aligns precisely with Elvis Presley's documented birth year of 1935. Bob Joyce isn't just genetically identical to Elvis. His DNA ages the same way Elvis's would have aged. And that's a detail you cannot fake, cannot manipulate, and cannot explain away with any theory other than the obvious one. Now consider what this means for the legal and financial architecture built on Elvis Presley's death. The estate has generated over $1 billion since 1977 through licensing agreements, merchandise, tourism revenue, and intellectual property management. Every single one of those contracts was predicated on one foundational legal fact. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, and his estate passed to his heirs according to the documented succession. If that foundational fact is false, if Elvis Presley did not actually die on that date, then every transaction, every licensing deal, every trademark registration filed after that moment exists in a legal gray zone that could unravel decades of financial arrangements. The people who would be liable for that potential fraud aren't abstract corporate entities. They're individuals, named individuals who signed documents, who notarized statements, who testified under oath about the circumstances of Elvis's death. Some of them are still alive, and some of them have spent the last 47 years profiting from a story that this DNA evidence suggests was fabricated from the beginning. The estate's response to the lab report tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they're taking this threat. Within 18 hours of receiving notification that the genetic match had been logged into a federal database, 3 separate legal actions were filed. The first challenged the chain of custody on the Graceland sample, arguing that the Textile Preservation Project had not followed proper archival protocols. The second attempted to have Bob Joyce's commercial DNA profile retroactively removed from the Ancestry database under privacy statutes that were never designed for this kind of situation. And the third, the one that reveals the true depth of their desperation, requested an emergency injunction against a person who had been dead for 15 years. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's longtime manager, and the man who controlled every aspect of his career and who died in 1997 with secrets that apparently still terrify the people trying to protect the Presley legacy. You don't file legal motions against dead men unless you're trying to seal records that dead men left behind, unless those records contain something that would confirm exactly what the DNA evidence suggests. The question everyone asks when they first hear this story is why? Why would the most famous man in the world fake his own death? Why would the people around him help? And why, after all these years, would the truth start coming out now? The answers aren't simple, but they're disturbingly logical once you understand the world Elvis Presley was living in during those final years. This wasn't a man at the height of his power making an impulsive decision. This was a man trapped inside a machine that was grinding him down, surrounded by people who had more to gain from his fame than he ever did, facing pressures that went far beyond what the public ever saw. By 1977, Elvis wasn't just exhausted. He was legally vulnerable. There were federal investigations circling around figures in his orbit, people connected to organized crime, people who used his concerts and his tours as fronts for activities that had nothing to do with music. Elvis himself wasn't the target, but he was close enough to the fire that cooperation with federal authorities was becoming a very real possibility. And cooperation would have meant testimony. It would have meant naming names, as it would have meant putting himself in a position where the people who'd been using him as cover would have every reason to make sure he never made it to a witness stand. The threats weren't hypothetical. People close to Elvis during that period have described him as paranoid, isolated, and convinced that his life was in danger from forces he couldn't control. Then there was Colonel Parker, the man who'd managed Elvis since the beginning, who controlled his contracts, his finances, his access to the outside world. Parker was an illegal immigrant operating under a stolen identity, a man whose entire existence depended on maintaining control over the one asset that kept him protected and wealthy. If Elvis had ever tried to break free, if he'd ever sought independent legal counsel or attempted to renegotiate the terms of their arrangement, Parker's entire world would have collapsed. And men like Parker don't just let that happen. They find solutions. And sometimes those solutions involve making the problem disappear in a way that benefits everyone who needs the machine to keep running. The plan, if the evidence is to be believed, required cooperation from a very small circle of people. A body would have been needed, something that could pass a cursory examination, something that could be embalmed and sealed in a casket before anyone asked too many questions. Medical cadavers were accessible to people with the right connections. Wax figures with embedded biological material were used in Hollywood for decades. The technology to make something convincing enough for a closed casket viewing absolutely existed in 1977. And the autopsy report that was sealed for 50 years, the one that raised so many questions among independent medical reviewers, would make a lot more sense if what was being examined wasn't actually Elvis Presley. For the first decade, Elvis would have lived in complete hiding. No public appearances, no contact with anyone outside the circle of people who facilitated the disappearance. But by the late 1980s, enough time had passed. Enough of the dangerous people were gone. And the man who'd once been Elvis Presley could begin the process of re-entering the world as someone else. Bob Joyce didn't appear overnight. He built a quiet life. He chose ministry, a profession where devotion and service would explain a man who seemed older than his documented age, a man who carried himself with a kind of world weariness that didn't match someone supposedly living an ordinary life. And he sang. Not for fame, not for money, but because some things are too deeply woven into a person's identity to ever fully let go. What's changed in the last 5 years is technology. Genetic databases that didn't exist in 2000 are now standard tools for genealogists and forensic investigators. Artificial intelligence can analyze voice patterns and facial structures with accuracy that would have been science fiction 2 decades ago. And legal protections that once seemed permanent have eroded as new laws prioritize transparency and scientific access over institutional control. As Lisa Marie's death in 2023 removed one of the last people who could have intervened to stop this process. And without her, the estate's ability to suppress inconvenient evidence has weakened considerably. Bob Joyce still preaches, he still sings, and he still refuses to directly deny what the DNA evidence now strongly suggests. The estate is fighting harder than ever to control the narrative, but the science doesn't care about narratives. It cares about facts. And the facts are becoming impossible to ignore. The DNA test didn't just prove Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. It proved that the greatest disappearing act in history wasn't a magic trick. It was a survival plan. And the people who made it possible are still alive, still powerful, and still terrified of what comes next. And this story is being buried under legal pressure and algorithmic suppression. But the truth doesn't need permission to spread. It just needs people willing to share it. If this reached you, don't let it stop here. Share this video before the estate's lawyers find a way to make it disappear. Subscribe because this fight is far from over, and the next chapter is going to shatter everything you thought you knew. Drop a comment if you've seen the evidence yourself or if you've been silenced for asking the right questions. The king never left the building. He just changed the door he walked through, and now the whole world is about to follow him back inside.